Dr. Susan Engel is the class of 1959 director of the program in teaching and a senior lecturer in psychology at Williams College. She's the author of The End of the Rainbow, How Educating for Happiness, Not Money Would Transform Our Schools, The Hungry Mind, Origins of Curiosity in Childhood, The Intellectual Lives of Children, The Stories Children Tell, Making Sense of the Narratives of Childhood, Red Flags or Red Herrings, Predicting Who Your Child Will Become, Context is Everything, The Nature of Memory, and A School of Our Own, which she co-authored with the youngest of her 3 sons, to name a few of her books and publications. Susan started her teaching career as an early teenager right here with a camp she and her friend Stacey started for young kids called Small Potatoes. And much later, she was the founding educational advisor for the Hayground School, where I was pretty much raised. Dr. Engel, you'll hear me refer to her as Susan, Susie, and Dr. Engel. Sometimes other things. Is the mother of 3 fabulously different sons and a grandmother to 4 spicy grandchildren. She was a student at our own John M. Marshall Elementary School, the former Hampton Day School, a graduate of Sarah Lawrence College, and has a doctorate in developmental psychology from CUNY. Most importantly to me, though, she is my absolute favorite person to talk with about kids and school, sometimes as one topic and sometimes standalone. She's also my aunt, a mentor, and a collector of my unflattering selfies. I am a 2nd grade teacher and have been working in elementary education for 11 years. Once, Susie visited my classroom in New York City for part of a day. I was totally excited and nervous and proud to have her there. She spent some time in the room taking it all in, and later on when we talked about it, I learned that her most favorite part was a moment when I was sitting in a tiny student chair talking to a kid and noticed a small but formidable presence behind me. I said, "Is someone touching my hair?" In response, "Yes, I wanted to." So I quickly replied with what seemed to me natural and logical, "If you want to talk to me, come around to the front." I still don't know why that tickled her so much, but we joke about it all the time. As a generous and eager mentor in my teaching life, she can without fail offer a seemingly simple reframe or suggestion that helps me see the other side of something that feels too big or too hard from my angle. We get so deep in our engagement about education that family members sometimes silently exit the space. Before my first year as a head teacher, I had so many ideas about how I would be, but I was stuck on what would bring my class together in the very beginning. We hatched a plan to build a habitat for 1st graders, to start the year with a collaborative project. We thought building something together that was physical and large would help make the idea of our new little community more tangible. We wanted to build a space for the new us based on who we all were. Later, we devised a plan to turn the entire classroom into a city block as a culminating project for a neighborhood study. The rule was the buildings could only be as tall as the tallest kid. This year, I told her about a student who in moments of frustration only communicates with me through writing, and who wrote me a note saying he would never ever tell me what was bothering him, even if I paid him. Or sorry, if I gave him money. She replied by asking if I told him I would bring my wallet on Monday. And later said, "Sounds like he's got you hooked." She had the perspective and humor to see the loving attachment that was there when I was too close to it and frankly frustrated by it. I had heard a lot about the kindergarten project and was endlessly intrigued by the micro adventures taking place across the country in order to collect all this juicy data on kindergartens. In addition to the main event, what was happening in the classrooms with the kids and teachers, what was the room layout, where do they eat lunch, what phonics program are they using or not using? I also wanted to know what she was eating in all those things. What museums did she see? Who did she encounter and what did she wear? As a teacher, I often talk about how you should make a movie in your mind as you read. When I finally cracked open American Kindergarten, I was not making the movie in my mind because I felt I was standing in each of those classrooms. I know teachers who, like Miss Grady, are colorful in clothing only and whose classrooms reflect a Swiss sanatorium. And teachers like Ms. Salieri, who admits to not always connecting right away with each student, what confidence and humility in that knowing. And who said, I just don't give up. I keep looking for something to connect with about each of them. And part of it depends on giving them enough kinds of activities and experiences so that I can see what they do or say or are that I could love. I see you, Miss Salieri. Sometimes I talk about writing a child's name down and keeping it in my pocket, or just watching and watching until I see a special moment I can hold on to. Have to shout out to my kindergarten teacher who's here and saw me. Thanks, Liz. I'm so curious about classrooms other than my own, and I think kindergarten teachers have superpowers. So there was no question as to whether I would enjoy and be entertained. I didn't know what great delight I would take in reading this book. In the book, my aunt, Dr. Engel, outlines 5 promises of kindergarten: love, order, identity, reading, and thinking. And later we learn of a 6th promise, joy. What stood out to me and rose above the text from the very beginning, collecting and building as the book went on, was the sense that love needs to live in kindergarten. In every space where kids are, love should live there too. Amid the mess and the chaos and the cleaning up of the mess, love should be there. To me, love and joy are inseparable partners in varying degrees in the classroom, in the context of the classroom, and they're foundational for intellectual growth, good thinking, to use your term, boundaries that feel safe rather than constricting, passion for learning and reading, and development of persistence. This all comes as no surprise, given the author's descriptions of these most important subjects, children. At one point she says, you say, no child, once you get to know them, ever seems average. Each is a teeming bundle of burdens, delights, abilities, hopes, uncertainties, and desires. I love the way this book and you love these kids. If the rest of you were ever curious about what happens behind the doors of a kindergarten classroom, read this book. And also, if you were never curious about it, definitely read this book. Please welcome my aunt. Oh.
Hi, I'm a little choked up. I've been giving, how old am I? 66. I've been giving talks for about 40 years that got introductions. That's hands down the best introduction I've ever done. So thank you, Jaja. I'm very happy to be here. So this is my hometown. Well, Sagaponack is my hometown. And I've spent part of every year of my whole life here. And a lot of my family is here and they live here. And there's some of you I know and some of you I don't know. And that's the perfect combination for a writer like me. So thank you for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit. I mean, I feel like I could sit down or we could all go have a drink because Jaja kind of conveyed the heart of the book, but I won't, I'll read. I'm going to tell you a little bit why I wrote this book or how it started. And then I'm going to read to you a bunch of different parts of it. I'm going to jump around and I'll guide you through my jumping around. And I hope it makes sense to you as I read. So during COVID, when I was on a sabbatical, the worst time sabbatical ever, stuck in my study for months, all I could do is talk on Zoom to a few colleagues and read. I began, come on in. I began to think about, I made a chart of all the changes, important changes that had happened in schools, the ones that were accidental and the ones that were deliberate. And I began to try to figure out which ones had had a lasting impact that was good, which had had no impact at all, and which had had an impact that was bad. And it was a very intriguing chart. It kept me busy during part of that sabbatical. But at some point, I began to realize that I didn't really know what schools were like. And that's a strange thing for me to say because I've been directing a program and teaching for a long time. I helped with a school out here. But I thought, and part of the problem was, as a developmental psychologist, I read research that's really good and really precise and really hones in on a particular thing. But often it's so particular that it gives you no sense of what that process is like in the real world. So you learn how 5-year-old boys figure out how to make the long sounds of vowels, or how girls who are second born make friends in a way that's different than girls that are first born. And all of that is important for us to know, but it doesn't tell you anything about schools. And if you look on the other side at the sort of common public narrative about education, and here I mean public education, it's incredibly overblown and mostly histrionic. You have readers, I have all these great headlines at home that I do when I'm giving academic talks. Readers are falling behind, America falls to the bottom, children are being kicked to the corner, teachers are in the rubber room all the time. I'm not a fan of the, I'll just say it right out, Waiting for Superman, one of the worst documentary film that just painted a horrible and hysterical picture of what schools are like. And the thing is, I've spent time in schools my whole adult life as an observer, as a coach, as a researcher. And I know that there are a lot of good schools out there, and there are a lot of good teachers, and there are lots and lots of good children. So I began to think, okay, how am I going to find out what schools are really like? Because I can't find a record of it anywhere. And I thought, I know, I'll go look for myself. And honest to God, that's all that was behind this book. I thought, I'll just take a trip. I had a friend who was a nonfiction book writer who had a map on his wall with push pins for all the places he was going to travel for his book. He's very famous and writes a very different kind of book. And I thought, I want a map. I want push pins. So I got one, and I began to chart out my travels across the country. And the one other thing I'll say about that is that it was very hard. My first surprise, so I talked to a friend of ours who's a journalist, and I said, is this a stupid idea? I'm not a journalist, I'm a psychologist, I'm a researcher. Shall I go around and visit? Is that dumb? And she said, you'll only know once you start making the visits when something surprises or puzzles you, then you'll know you're on to a good thing. Well, the first thing that puzzled me is it was very hard to get schools to let me in. And the more I talked about my credentials, the worse it was. And to be totally honest, and I would say this in any part of the country, the further west I went, the worse it was. So in the end, it was a total grab bag of schools. The good thing about that is that me as a researcher knew I didn't have to be worried about a bias in picking good schools or bad schools. I knew I wanted to go to all quadrants of the country. I knew that I only was going to look at public schools, but I wanted them to be from racially homogeneous communities and racially heterogeneous communities, poor and rich, urban and rural. And luckily, I finally pushed my way into enough schools to have that sort of cross section. But other than that, it was as random as you can get, not random in the statistical sense, but pretty grab baggy. I wasn't picking and choosing. And in the end, I visited, I'm going to get this part wrong, but I think I visited 13 states, 15 schools, and 29 classrooms. And this is what came of it. And as Jaja said, in the end, I organized the book around these five plus promises. And she's already told you what they are. I'm going to read you a little from some of them, and I might say a word or two as I go about the particular place, but I'm just going to jump in with part from the beginning. On a honey-colored day in late August 1992, my 5-year-old son Will sat down to his preferred breakfast, a frozen raspberry strudel, toasted and iced, and a glass of milk. As he chewed and gulped, I reminded him that it was his first day of kindergarten, and that in just a few minutes it would be time to catch the bus. His brother Jake was a third grader, so Will knew secondhand all about bus rides, recess, and worksheets. He also had 3 years of daycare under his belt. Even so, he was aware that this was different. Kindergarten would be a whole new world for him, big and foreign, and the new world began at the end of our driveway. He looked at me as I spoke, but said nothing, licking the jam off of his fingers. A few minutes later, breakfast eaten and clock ticking, I said, let's go. His thick, dark eyebrows lowered, a frown hovering over each eye. He glowered at me. I don't want to go, he said. But even as he spoke, he put his hand in mine, and we walked outside. The closer we got to the bus stop, the further his head hung down, shiny, straight brown hair framing his face, a curtain of resistance. As we walked, I chattered. Of course you're nervous. That's so natural. That's how I am. But I promise you're going to love it when you get there. Remember how nice Mrs. Anderson is? It's going to be so fun. But he knew what was what. He said again, I don't want to go. I said, you're very brave to go on the bus, to begin at a new school. I'm proud of you for being so brave. Will stopped walking and his head shot up. He looked me right in the eyes, a challenging glint there. If you say I'm brave, that means I have a choice. Do I? Do I have a choice? No, I stuttered. I just mean you're very strong to do this, even though you're scared. I'll be following behind in the car, and when you get off the bus, I'll be right behind you in the car, and we can wave at each other. His worried little self kept trudging ahead. As he walked up the steps of the bus, his new backpack flapping against his small, compact torso, he shot me a baleful glance, then disappeared into the cavernous interior. 11 minutes later, his bus stopped and 7 scraggly 5-year-old boys and girls made their way down the steps towards the shingled building that would be their home away from home for the year. Will stood just behind a girl wearing a barrette decorated with blinking lights that flickered on and off when she moved, and just in front of a little boy who was tightly gripping his catcher's mitt. Will spun around and gave me one last dark look. Then he turned back toward the door in front of him and marched forward, resolved but gloomy, into the world of formal schooling. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead. I want to leave some parts for you to want to read. So you can... This is from the beginning of the chapter called Enamored with You, the Promise of Love. And I will say, before I read the part from this chapter, that it's turned out, it seemed so intuitive to me, and it's turned out to be the most controversial chapter. And that's because I've gotten some very nice feedback about this book from colleagues, which I don't always get, but I did with this book. But that makes them very uncomfortable. Why do you have to call it love? Why can't you call it interpersonal, reciprocal, something, something? And then one scholar at Harvard, when I was giving a talk there, an economist who had spent 9 years doing his research in Uganda, came up to me. He didn't know what all the other people had said. And he said, thank God you used the word love. What's wrong with you people in the US that you can't talk about the role of love in a classroom? So anyway, that's not where I'm going to begin the chapter, though. My 4-year-old granddaughter Lena and I drive to town to buy some groceries. As we reach the main road, I am struck by how much progress has been made on the new housing project under construction near the grocery store. Last time we were here, it was just a foundation and some outside studs. Now 5 large house-like structures, each containing 5 apartments, are nearing completion. I point to it through the windshield and say, "Look, Lena, aren't those buildings huge?" She looks at the massive structures, properly impressed with the change since we last saw them. She says, those kids must have a lot of grandmas and grandpas. I say, or a lot of different families will live in each building. No, she says with certainty, grandmas and grandpas. When the man built our houses, he put your house next to mine because you're my grandma, and he put Henry's house next to me too, because Henry is my cousin, because he knew we all love each other so much. She's right, we do love each other. And at 4, she already seems to understand what it means to love and be loved. Will she find that in kindergarten? Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead to the part of the same chapter that's in one of the schools. And as I think Jaja said, I tried to give a feeling for what the community's like, where the schools were. And that comes from my own interests and also a host of research that shows that every school is particular to its place and its community and its neighborhood. So this is in Queens, New York. As I emerge from the subway at 7:20 a.m. onto a street in the New York City borough of Queens, I am whooshed back to the 1950s. I should be honest, I wasn't alive in the 1950s, but anyway, some blocks are filled with houses made of mid-century yellow brick. They have wrought iron screen doors, many decorated with wreaths of faded plastic flowers. The apartment buildings are also made of brick, and they are low for New York City, 8 stories or less. It is spring, and the trees that line the streets are in lush green leaf. Some houses have narrow strips with wheelbarrows, small tricycles, and dog toys lying on the grass or pebbles. You would see none of this in other parts of the city, say Manhattan or the lower sections of the Bronx. Here, in this part of Queens, there is a church every few blocks with signs in different languages. Some are Roman Catholic, but others seem to be Hindu temples, Muslim mosques, or Jewish synagogues. Older women are pulling old-fashioned wire grocery carts on wheels, while other younger people are dressed for work and out walking their dogs. There are delis, hardware stores, coffee shops, definitely not cafes, and dry cleaners. It feels like a true city neighborhood. But part of what makes it feel so old-fashioned, honestly, is the variety of families, ages, activities, and clothing. Turbans, house dresses, hipster pants, office skirts, and running shorts, making their way down the block early in the morning. It's surprisingly quiet on these streets, given that we're in New York City. I think to myself, so this is a melting pot. The school is as plain and low-key as the houses, buildings, and stores around it. No jazzy signs or logos. Pasted to the brick wall is a small piece of red electrical tape on which someone has handwritten in black magic marker, "Line up pre-K," with an arrow going that way. There's also a white piece of paper on which someone has typed the words, "Please don't feed the cats, thank you." PK2 this way, PK3 this way. There's very little to tell you it's a school, just the sign that reads PS 1001. It's refreshingly low-tech or shabby, probably both. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the playground where all the kids are lined up saying goodbye to their peoples before they join the classroom. The playground, like those in most cities, is stark, just pavement surrounded by a chain link fence. Just outside the fence stand all the adults who have brought their children to school. They chat with one another, but mostly they watch their kids on the other side of the fence. Like the people on the street, these moms, dads, and grandparents are wearing turbans, business suits, saris, flowing ruffled skirts, jeans, ski jackets, and corduroys. Almost all of them are smiling at their children. And then I hear a version of what I have heard in every school where parents drop their children off. "I love you, buddy. Be good. Adios, mio. Alvida, sweetie pie," which means bye-bye, sweetie pie in Hindi. Sarange, "I love you," in Korean. Plus 6 other accents or languages I can barely catch and cannot spell. Here in Queens, one short, round grandmother wearing a plain black dress as if she were still lived in Rome in 1930, beckons to her grandson to come over to the chain link fence. She presses her fleshy face up against the wire and pushes her lips through. He knows what she wants. He stands on tippy toes and pushes his lips up as well. One goodbye smooch before he turns away and joins the line of children headed for the kindergarten classroom. With kisses and endearments at their back, what waits for the children once they're inside the school walls? At 7:55 a.m., the kids file into the room. It's very quiet. Ms. Miller, I've described her earlier, I'm not going to, here, moves around the room, setting things up, handing out small items to children, a water bottle, a pencil, a sweater. She's matter-of-fact and quiet as she gets the children ready for the day to begin. She is efficient and gentle with them, but almost completely detached. 10 full minutes of helping 5-year-olds settle in, and I don't see her make eye contact with one of them. The children sit quietly at their desks, each munching food from a school-provided plastic breakfast bag. Ms. Miller glances up at the clock, something she does frequently, and says, "Okay, let's go. You have about 2 more minutes left." In her low, even tone, one has to strain to hear her. She calls out their names and they raise their hands. No one speaks but her. She tells them they have 1 more minute to eat before they have to clean up. I haven't seen her smile yet, but as she passes one little boy, she silently reaches out and tousles his head. I wrote it, but I can't say it. The children are called to the colored floor mats, one table at a time. Ms. Miller turns on a cartoon that shows a character going over the calendar. When it is over, she asks them to identify the information from the video. Ms. Miller asks, "What month are we in?" Darlene says, "April." Ms. Miller says, "Do we speak in words?" "No, we speak in what?" Elias calls out, "Sentences." Ms. Miller says, "Yes, we speak in sentences." Ms. Miller speaks again. "What month are we in?" Rainey says, "We're in the month of April." Ms. Miller says, "Yes, that's right, and I like how you put it in a sentence." Then I go on. They're watching a video. A little boy named Logan with warm brown skin, red hair, a big brown beauty mark on his round cheek, and a slightly woeful expression on his face drops a toy car on the floor. Ms. Miller stops the calendar lesson to tell him to pick it up and give it to her. In a flat tone, she says, "No toys in school. Since when do we allow toys in school? You know better. Give it to me." She puts it up on top of the screen where he will see it all day long. She says, when will you get it back? At the end of the day. You know better. Logan says nothing, but he looks just a little more woeful. So that was a class with very little love in it. I'm going to give you a contrast. This is in Johnston, Texas. Does anybody have any idea how long I'm taking?
It's fine.
Oh, it's okay. Johnston, Texas. 30 minutes outside of Dallas, Texas, lies one of the starkest places I've ever seen, appearing to me like the embodiment of all our mistakes as a culture. The farther you get from the center of the city, the more bleak it seems. Great expanses of open land, neither farmed nor wild, stretch under a vast, bright blue sky and are punctuated only by highways, huge cement buildings, and parking lots lined with big box stores, warehouses, large gas stations, and electric poles. From my motel, you can walk anywhere. You cannot walk anywhere, not even for a toothbrush or a sandwich. You'll need a car even to safely get to the ribs joint right across the street. And so I go on describing it. And then Greenview Elementary, which is just as drab as everything else in this locale, an H-shaped building made of beige bricks. It sits back from the street, surrounded by dusty ground, sprinkled with little patches of yellow grass and a carpet of dried brown leaves. And then I go on talking about the setting, and I talk about the teacher, whose name is Chris McKenzie. She is 73 years old and has taught for 37 years. Tall and lanky, she wears a purple sweatshirt with a Southern College logo on it and blue jeans. Her blonde hair is cut in a page boy and her face is covered in freckles. She must have been extremely pretty when she was young. She's very pretty now. In a deep Southern drawl, she tells me that though she was born in Georgia, her family moved to Texas when she was 9. She moves around the classroom in an unhurried and comfortable way. There is no sense in which she has to begin the show, turn on, or be ready. She looks as if she were wandering around her living room, waiting for some friendly neighbors to arrive. She chats easily to me throughout the day, not at all worried about interrupting a lesson to tell me various things about her family, the children, her views of education. It's 7:25 a.m. and Chris ambles into the classroom, sorting out various materials and arranging things. She takes her time. There's no indication that 17 children are about to enter the room or that an unremitting schedule of activity is about to unfold. However, we are not alone for long. Dylan, who is small for his age and looks as if he had stepped out of a James Dean movie, comes through the door. He had this amazing hair thing. He is a blonde crew cut with a greased wave on the top. Oh, I wrote it in there. And camo shorts. He comes in early before any other child, looking somehow both too young for kindergarten and yet also strangely like a 20-year-old. Chris looks up and says to him, "Hi, baby," in an affectionate grandmotherly tone. "Come over here. There's something I want you to see." He readily walks over to her side, leaning against her just a little bit. She puts her hand on his shoulder and shows him the cover of a book she's pasting together for a read-aloud period, which will come later in the day. The page she shows him has a photograph of a little frog on it. He looks at it for a moment, then looks around the room and says, "I'm here, but no one else is here." She says, "That's good. You got here early. I'm glad you're here early. We have a minute to get ready for everyone. I thought you'd like that little frog." Later, they've left the classroom on their way to a special subject. And as they left the classroom, Dylan, the small boy who had been first to arrive in the morning, ran forward from his spot in the line and grabbed Chris's hand. He walked so close to her that his little torso kept rubbing up against her leg. If it made walking difficult, she didn't let on. At one point, she veered toward him as well, giving him a little bump of affection, like two sweethearts on a stroll, or like a grandmother enjoying the park with her grandson. As Chris and Dylan leaned into one another, his head just touching her hip, she looked over at me and said, "This one is my one." I knew right away in early September that he would be one of my ones. And it was really from her that I got the idea that I would call that chapter love, the thing that so disturbed some of my colleagues. Let me see, I'm screwing this up. I gotta look for the right page. 36, give me a minute. 46, give me another minute. Okay. So now I'm in the chapter, the last chapter of the book, or the penultimate chapter of the book, is about something I care so much about. I care about it as much as I care about love in the classroom, which is the intellectual lives of the children in the classroom and what it takes to develop those. And I titled this chapter, Bringing the World Inside. And I'm going to read to you a little bit from that chapter. My 4-year-old granddaughter, Lena, was settled into her big girl car seat next to her newborn baby brother, Oscar, who was strapped into his newborn car seat. Lena handed Oscar a stuffed animal to hold during the upcoming drive. I stood at the open door waiting to see them off. In her most condescending nanny-like voice, she said to her 4-month-old brother, Oscar, you can hold Brown Bear. You like that? He can be yours forever, your favorite toy. You can tell Brown Bear, you and me will always love each other. I butt in, Lena, you know who I feel that way about? Her head spins around from gazing sentimentally at Oscar to stare at me quizzically. Who, she says. I say, you. We love each other so much. I always want to be with you and play with you forever and ever. I think my outburst of love will delight her. She gazes at me, giving nothing away. There's a tiny pause. Then, looking right into my eyes, she says in a flat voice, but you know we're both going to die someday, right? I find out later that Lena has been chewing over the concept of death for weeks, bringing it up at odd moments, asking questions and commenting on various people's inevitable demise. Her reply to me reflected a lot of thought. It's surprisingly common for young children to ponder weighty puzzles like death. My students and I asked 275 parents from all quadrants of the United States and from a wide range of backgrounds and ethnicities to describe to us the topics their young children brought up again and again. While parents reported a rich variety of topics, how music is made, superheroes, how various machines are put together, ice hockey, fairy princesses, there was also remarkable convergence on some topics. The most frequently named were how dinosaurs became extinct, what happens in outer space, and what happens when people die. A majority of the children zeroed in on one of these conundrums above all other topics and spoke about it repeatedly over a period of weeks and sometimes months. Our data illustrate what developmental psychologists have long known. Children need to think, and under most circumstances, they love to do so. Why? Not because it's good for them or because it might lead to good grades. The children in our study were under the age of 6. They are drawn to such thought projects because it feels so good to figure things out. When they think about things that they find compelling, whether weighty or frivolous, they pursue their thoughts with a zeal. Sometimes they fasten on delights and sometimes on fears. And then I go on to talking about that a little bit. So now I'm going to give you, and I have 2 more parts to read to you, so bear with me. I'm going to read to you from a school in Baltimore, Maryland, which through this project has become one of my favorite cities in the country. I make my way through one of the poorest neighborhoods in Baltimore to visit a Title I school. That is a school that receives federal aid because so many of its students live below the poverty line. 80% of the children who attend Madison Elementary School live within 1 mile of the school, and 75% of the students are Black. And then I go on describing the school a little bit, and I begin talking about the teacher. Terry Garth has just turned 40. Her young son attends 1st grade, and her daughter is in 5th grade. They come to school with her each morning and go home with her as well, except for days when she has to remain late for meetings. Before moving to Baltimore, Terry lived and taught in Brooklyn at a much more conventional school. She didn't like it much. I moved to Baltimore because my husband had a new job here. When I learned more about this school, it was like a breath of fresh air. I knew this was the place for me, and luckily I was hired. And then I go on talking about her. Let me pause. I'm going to read you an example from her classroom. But I will say that one of the great surprises of the book, which it took me a long time to discover, was that the idea we all so comfortably accept that white middle-class schools are good and that poor schools with minoritized kids, Black and brown kids mostly, are bad. And it's not that those schools shouldn't get the money that the white middle-class schools get. They must, they should. But money is necessary, but it's not enough. And some of the best schools I saw were in those impoverished and minoritized communities like this one. And some of the worst schools I saw were in the most privileged and most sort of white homogeneous schools. So that didn't track the way that people think it does. So now I'm going to go back to bringing the world inside. So there's a point in a meeting where Terry Garth says to them, it's time to play. The children disperse to tables or spaces set up for building or make-believe. They begin drawing, sculpting, fashioning, role-playing, imagining out loud, and building with blocks. Whoa. In building with blocks. The classroom has a quiet hum to it. Terry and her teaching fellow, Alex, wander around talking to the children, offering a suggestion or bit of help, and then moving on. Alex sits down in the block area and begins building blocks alongside some of the children. Two children paint on child-size easels. Behind the easels on the wall is a temporary display of 3 paintings by Kandinsky. Over at the toy kitchen area, 3 kids are pounding a doll in a frying pan. I ask them what they're doing, and they cheerfully explain, we're cooking a baby. Soon Terry has joined the chefs. She helps by feeding some play food to 2 dolls, but instead of feeding them the cooked baby, she gives them toy broccoli and toy butter. She moves the little toy bottle of hot sauce to the shelf, saying, I don't think we should give the babies hot sauce. I don't think they'll like that. They're too young. Terry lifts up one of the dolls and says, I think this baby is cold. She hands the baby back to Alice for warmer dressing. Alice puts a little coat on the doll and wraps them in a blanket. Terry explains to me that she always participates in the children's play. Sometimes I do it to show them another way to play, or to add a new level of pretense to their own spontaneous activity. Many of my students don't have much opportunity to do any kind of elaborate play at home, and they didn't get it in preschool either. And these days, a lot of their time with toys simply involves pressing a button. I think they have a very limited repertoire for pretense. It's part of my kindergarten curriculum to give them each a much richer and wider vocabulary of making things up. She explains, pretend play requires a lot of executive functioning. You have to think about this character you want to be and what to do to enact that character. You have to plan, keep others in mind, rethink scenarios. The kid who can pretend in kindergarten is the kid who can learn more academic stuff in the higher grades. Okay, I'm going to read from one more section. This is in one of the most, I'm reading you more good than bad. Why wouldn't I? And this is from a classroom that I also write about a lot in the book, just a wonderful classroom. And the teacher's name is Lisa. And it's not a particularly wealthy school, and it's a very mixed bag of educational backgrounds and economics in terms of the kids. And I just think that's important to recognize that these great things happen where there are good teachers. Lisa had warned me early on in my visits that she devotes a lot of time, often the whole afternoon, to centers, small areas of the room set up for specific activities. I wasn't sure why this bit of information was framed as a warning. They love centers, she says. I know I am supposed to spend more time on specific academic skills, but these kids need a lot of time to play and choose on their own. This is a very anxious group. They're not independent. You'll see shouting and crying during center time. I'm just warning you. I ask, why did they cry if they love it so much? He says, oh, well, they'll be devastated if they don't get their first choice of center, or if their friend can't go to the same center they're going to, or if they get there too late in the day and don't have enough time for the thing they most wanted. There's a lot of emotion during centers. That's why other teachers don't like the centers the way I do. And I'm going to skip, well, I guess I'll read this part, but I will say that when she said to me, they'll cry and scream when they can't do the thing that most grabs them, I thought, oh my God, these lucky kids. That's how I feel when I can't do the research I want to do. And so, that has to do with thinking about it a slightly different way. When I went to kindergarten in 1964 in East Hampton, it was, like many across the country, only a half-day program. Most of that time was free choice. You could work with puzzles, dress up like a firefighter, draw, look at books, or as the case may be, build castles with red cardboard bricks. I told a story in the beginning of the book about me and the red cardboard bricks. Now, almost all kindergartens is full day, and yet children have very little time to choose their own activity or play. Just as important, most classrooms are not set up to invite that kind of play. The room contains few toys, no props for dressing up, no blocks or space for building with them, and no easels. But things are different in Lisa Salieri's classroom. There is a small play kitchen set up, a doll corner, 3 different areas devoted to manipulatives and blocks, and a small maker's station. On this particular day, it has colored paper, scissors, and a little manual showing how to make a paper bird. Across the window is a string on which hangs all the birds the children have made so far this week. There is a cozy reading nook with huge pillows to lean against, a table for Play-Doh, and a toy truck area. When the schedule says center time, the children head over to a wall on which a large sheet of plastic that lists all the choices in words and also in a small illustration for those who don't yet read well. Next to each option are several small, clear plastic sleeves, as many of these as are available spots for the activity. 2 for the reading center, 6 for playing with blocks, 3 for dressing up, 1 for bird making, and so on. Each child's name is on a small slip of paper in the sleeve next to the activity they want to do. It's a remarkably straightforward way to let the group govern themselves. This section is actually from the chapter on children alone and together. And I'm glad to talk about that when I take questions. But it's also about bringing the world inside. So it's a remarkably great way to let kids govern themselves. And you can't put your name next to an activity whose spaces are already filled. Can I have some water? Oh. I thought I talked a lot, but this is even more talking. No, thank you. I'll still. When a child moves their name to another spot, a space opens up and another child can fill the spot. On a gray Tuesday, a little boy named Dominic is at the makerspace with all the bird-making materials, working with singular focus and a clear goal in mind. He gets busy right away. He cuts several pieces of thick neon yellow paper and tapes them together, rearranging, retaping, and even recutting until at last he's satisfied. It's not a bird. 1 wide strip covers the top of his hand. Another piece taped to the first extends all the way under his palm. I'm good, thanks. Oops. All the way under his palm. From that yellow band come 5 very long rectangular strips, 1 for each paper. Look, he says, holding up his wrapped hand and modeling his invention to anyone nearby. I've made a glove. It's cool, right? Look, I can move my fingers. Lisa Marty, her assistant, who is an amazing teaching assistant that I talk about in the book, and several nearby children admire his glove and his neon yellow wiggling fingers. Meanwhile, some children have been caring for babies in the house corner. Lisa spends center time wandering around the room. Sometimes she joins a group in their activities, sometimes she just watches or adds a comment. Now she wanders by the house area where 2 children have just left for another center, and the child who stayed put has turned from childcare to cooking. Lisa picks up a baby doll that has been left on the floor. She holds it as if it were a real baby, carrying it with her as she continues visiting other centers and chatting with children. She looks the way mothers and fathers do when they hold their baby while getting supper ready or walking to the mailbox. Finally, she walks back to the doll corner and puts the doll onto a wooden changing table, covering it with a small cloth. She says to the children nearby, I'm putting the baby in her crib. Now she'll have a nice nap. Before walking away, she pats the doll gently on its head. After giving the baby a nap, Lisa wanders over to the Play-Doh area. A little girl named Prisha and her friends are making cookies and chatting about their cookie making. You are productive, Lisa says to Prisha. Why don't we count the cookies? Instantly, Prisha and her friends merrily begin counting. They've made 17. Prisha, a small dynamo of a child who immigrated from India just 2 years ago, says in her lilting and perfect English, let's make more. We can make lots of cookies. I'm beginning to see a pattern that links the baby's nap and the cookie counting. Everywhere Lisa goes, she's stretching the children's play just a little bit. Lisa wanders off, but the girls continue baking. They chat while they work. Prisha says, as if she's talking through a loudspeaker, how about I'm the one who makes the toys? You're the one who makes the cookies. Turning to her co-worker, Sophia, the cookie maker, Prisha says in a quieter, solicitous, boss-like intonation, and how are the cookies coming along? Then, returning to her loudspeaker voice, she says authoritatively, we're actually not the ones who make the things, because we're the ones who make the money. We're the vice presidents. even though we're just kids. Her brown eyes widen. She has amazed herself and looks over to see if her friend is equally impressed. We're just teenagers. Tomorrow we're turning 15 and we're the vice presidents. Now her mouth opens in a surprised little oval and her brown eyes stretch even wider. She looks incredulous that they, mere 15-year-olds, have achieved so much. She turns to a reading specialist who happens to be in the room and says, "We're the vice presidents and we're only 10. We're the only ones who work." Oh, no, I left out a line. And we're only 10. We're the only ones who work in this town. The reading teacher asks, "Why is that?" Prisha answers promptly, sweeping her dark bangs aside with conviction, "Because no one in this town wants to work." Meanwhile, Tuan is sitting nearby. He has a compact body shape and a slightly serious look on his face. Tuan arrived in this country from Vietnam with his family only a few months ago. Lisa tells me he has learned English incredibly quickly. Right now, he has joined Dominic at the maker station. You remember Dominic with the green glove? But unlike Dominic, who made a glove, Tuan is actually making paper birds using the how-to book. This is not his first bird. He's working on his fourth. He has been listening to Prisha and Sophia as he works. Now he asks them, "What's a vice president?" Prisha ignores him. Marty, the teaching assistant who has wandered over, says, "Prisha, why don't you answer Tuan? He's asking you a question." Prisha looks momentarily stumped. Then she says, "A vice president helps the president." Tuan says, "Oh, like Alexander Hamilton helped George Washington?" Prisha just looks at him, a little nonplussed that someone besides her has an answer for everything. Then Tuan adds, "But all the presidents and vice presidents are boys." Prisha seems taken aback. Then her eyes narrow a little bit. She says, "But there was there was one who was a girl. There's a girl vice president. And anyway, we don't have to have only one girl vice president. This is make-believe. We can have lots of girl vice presidents. We can have it be the way we want it. But we don't want to play with Morgan because she's bossy. She's bossy. She's more bossy than a very bossy person." Prisha tosses her head defiantly. She's back in charge of the exchange. That's all I'm going to read. Maybe I used up all the time, did I not? But I would love to answer questions. I love to get questions. And don't worry about saying the nice thing. Say the thing you're most skeptical about. A colleague of mine at Williams, a biologist, said to me the other day, "I'm going to imitate you someday in a meeting." He said, "You're always the one that gets up something and then leans forward and says, 'Am I right or am I wrong?'" So I invite any question. Oh, ask. Yeah, Ella.
Well, someone else can go first. I don't want to take.
Go first. They need you.
Okay. I feel like I'm not gonna say this the right way, and I haven't gotten all the way to the end, so if you already say it in the book, you can tell me.
Give me another chance to say.
I notice a lot in the different classrooms that you talk about the level of order in relationship to both love and joy.
Yeah.
And their intellectual lives, but I'm just curious, like if you have a certain idea of like what's a good balance of order and
That's a great question.
the other things that have to bubble out that are so wonderful and important.
Well, that's a great question. And I don't think you need the same balance in every classroom because some kids are more orderly than other kids and they come to school already. And there were a lot of kids, and it's not the whole group either. Sometimes like that loving teacher, Chris, who said he's my one, she had one of the more boring classrooms I've ever been in. And so it was great for kids for whom love and order, which order was very important to her, were really important. But there was a little kid in there who was just bored to death, and it was frustrating for him. And there are other classrooms where, you know, where it partly depends on the kids, but it partly depends on the teacher. So I would say there's not one answer to what the balance. I think the bigger issue is that there needs to be a balance. So not all classrooms made all 5 promises. And some of the classrooms that made the same promise, like every classroom wanted order. No classroom didn't care about order. I never saw one like that. Every kindergarten teacher, I tell a story in the book about teachers saying to me things like, oh my God, when you came back in September, it was a zoo here. And now you'll see it's a lot different. And for them, order is a main goal, and with good reason, because they want all kids to be able to manage in an institutional setting and to learn how to, I guess the difference is some of the teachers want to help the kids learn how to, what my friend who's a clinical psychologist called self-modulate. I would say manage your own feelings and your own impulses. You know all about this. But so for some teachers, so some teachers keep order one way and some teachers keep it another way. And for some, it's so important that almost nothing else exists in the classroom. Then there are teachers like Lisa Salieri who wants order too. I mean, the sleeves was a way of getting order, but she doesn't want it at the expense of other things like a sense of community, or a chance for children to really dive into their own thoughts. So I guess the real answer is, if some teacher said to me, what's the right balance? I'd say, whatever balance you figure out that lets you meet both needs. And enough so that every kid some of the time is getting some of what they need, which is all you can hope. If you can do that, you're doing a miracle. Any other question? Yes.
Were some of the classrooms, the teachers more creative than the others? In other words, some directing more towards the learning process in the old-fashioned way, and some with.
Yes, so the classrooms vary a lot. One of the things, there's a whole chapter about reading. I never saw a classroom that didn't care about reading. Anybody who's worried that some kindergartens aren't teaching kids to read hasn't been spending time in kindergartens. But the way that they fulfill that, and there's a teacher in there who, it was so painful to watch the way that children were being taught to read, because while they were being taught to read, they were being taught to hate reading. And then there were other classrooms. Some classrooms, I didn't focus on that too much, but some classrooms, there's a classroom in that chapter where the teacher was just so skilled at getting the kids to read. And when I say that, I mean every part of reading: phonics, word recognition, fluency, all the things that you're hearing about, if you pay attention to those things that are sort of back in vogue now. But she didn't do it at the expense of them acquiring knowledge that would make reading interesting to them, or at the expense of their ending the year wanting to be readers. But so the answer to your question is yes, some teachers were quite restrictive, and some, I don't use the word creative for other reasons I won't bore you with, but some teachers, I don't know if they were more creative people, they just had children, the whole person in mind when they were thinking about what to do. But every classroom used phonics, and almost every classroom had Lexia, this deadly little laptop thing. My grandchildren, they use Lexia in their classrooms. It's ubiquitous now. It's a programming. Do you use it? Well, different kind of school, but
What was the difference between the amount of equipment in these different classrooms?
yeah, it didn't matter at all about equipment. I mean, the Baltimore school is one of the lowest funded schools I visited. Everything was shabby. I was so relieved to see the armchair in the hallway, but the reason it was there is they didn't have the money for the fancy little plastic waiting room seat or whatever. And so someone had donated their chair. And so there were things, and there was a difference in what mattered in classrooms, like play equipment or order. But there's a lot of variety in the book. I saw a lot of different things, and then some things were the same everywhere. Every school I went to, but one Montessori school in Memphis, Tennessee, but except for that one, every single one had the same carpet. I mean, somebody's really lit with the same colors, and people use them differently, but the same carpet everywhere. And everybody has a schedule and a snack time, and it's fun. It's meaningless either way. I mean, those are just nice, ordinary things. You know, I love public schools, and I love the ordinariness of them. because they allow for a lot of variation. So none of that bothered me. And the school I saw that was the most beautiful was one of the hardest schools to visit because it was so beautiful. It was stultifying. Liz?
I have two questions. Can I ask two?
Sure.
Um,
Nada did, you can.
so I haven't started the book yet. I have it now. So my first question is your promises
Yeah,
was, did the ideas of, did your idea of the promises come out of all of your observations?
yeah.
Mulling over everything?
It's a great question, and when I give more pedantic versions of
Yeah.
this, I talk about it. So this is not the way I usually do research, the way I did this book. I'm conventional, I design studies and experiments and stuff. But in this case, I really just wanted to visit it. Really, I meant to say at the beginning and I forgot. I was too overwhelmed with emotion. I've written a lot of books and I hope I'll write another one or two. No book is worth writing if you don't have a question you want to answer. And if you've already answered the question, for me, I don't want to write a book I've already answered the question to. So I had a real question. What am I going to think? And I did not have a method except to go in and watch. And I write about this in a book. I was very comfortable. I've done a lot of observation that I would know what to look at. But I didn't know what I would think about what I looked at. And a colleague of mine, older and wiser and more experienced than I, who does a lot of experiments too, but he said, try not to bring any preconceptions, try to be open. And I did, but I'm me. And I've been teaching teachers for years, and I have children and I have grandchildren. So I did bring myself into the classroom. I couldn't leave myself out of it. I didn't have a scoring, coding sheet. I wasn't having research assistants check things up. So I was in the classroom, which is a long-winded way of saying that the themes emerged to me as I was visiting the classrooms, because these were the things I kept seeing over and over again. I kept seeing love or its absence, and a sort of oppressive order or a congenial order, a calming order, and so forth and so on. So yes, it definitely emerged. And I think it was from what I saw, not what I brought with me into the classroom. Okay, question two.
I love your answer. I love the cover of your book. Could you do
I forgot. So Lisa Salieri's classroom, which I spent a lot of time in, made that collage, and then they gave it to me. And it's huge.
Wow.
And I fight with book editors about covers. I lose every single time, but I didn't lose with this one because I sent it to the University of Chicago Press and they said, we love it. And that was it. So this is done by some of the children that are described in the book. And that's very good. Thanks for asking.
Have you seen
No, it's different kids. And the kids are like fifth grade, and they probably have their periods, and who knows? No, I don't know why I said that.
Maybe not.
You never know. A lot of kids are getting their periods very young. I have to tell you something now that I said that embarrassing thing. I'm teaching a lecture course right now with 50 students at Williams. Isn't there a Williams parent in this room? Oh my God, right? Her daughter was my beloved student at Williams. And but about a week or two ago, I was talking about something. I wanted them to break up in pairs to discuss some piece of research they had just read. And I said, break up in pairs, find someone else to talk to, but I don't know how many people are at the class today. So there may be a few extras. So if you need to, just create a threesome. Oh my God, they looked at me like, please don't talk that way. So I'm sorry if I did that again. One more question. Is there time for one more? Yes.
Working a class of 8th graders as part of a master's program.
Great.
And I was watching and the teacher said, oh, Henry, don't be a mother-in-law. And I'm like,
He said to the kid, don't be a mother-in-law?
but, and so I kept watching and I realized that was her kind of personality.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing, and that she was consistent.
Yes,
The kids knew like, okay, that's how she feels.
right.
And that's how she expresses it.
Right.
And I realized that the consistency of her personality made that okay.
Well, I would suggest something a little different.
But
I don't think it's consistency as much as being who you really are.
Well, that's.
And one of the things I talk about in the book, but I mean, not all of us are consistent. So when I've seen Jaja be quite firm with a consequence, and then I've heard her say, "Are you someone touching my hair?" Which was said with such love, firmness, but love, like such, we're intimate. And the thing is, I do think that, there's another topic kind of, but one of the things that matters most is that teachers take pleasure in their work. And one of the things we do worst as a society is to think about how important it is, not just for the teachers, but for their students, if being in the classroom feels good at least some of the time.
Safe.
Well, safe, yes, but also fun. I mean, if nothing about it is fun or intriguing or exciting to you, how can you possibly do a good job? We don't ask any other high-level professional to experience their work that way, but we've mistakenly allowed teachers to experience their work that way. So I would say that when that teacher was allowed to let herself, was a woman, you said, yeah, Henry, don't be a mother-in-law. She was being herself, and lucky kids and lucky her that happened. So thank you all for coming.